Now, the way you generally lose your eyesight with RP is it starts off with night blindness, so struggling from light to dark places. So what seems like dim light to most feels like complete darkness to anyone with night blindness. Sunlight seems like extreme glare. And the way I tend to describe it to people is, for the normal sighted person walking into, say, a dark room, say, for example, a cinema, it takes a normal sighted person maybe a couple of seconds for their eyes to adjust to any sort of change in light. For someone with night blindness, you really struggle to adjust. So, it either takes a lot longer or you just don't adjust at all. Then you start to lose your peripheral vision with RP. So you may have heard of the expression tunnel vision. That's the same thing. So it's like a tunnel closing inwards, and then you start to lose your central vision, and often it results in complete blindness. There are no treatments or cures for RP to this day, although we are doing some amazing work at the moment. Now, the very first time I heard about retinitis pigmentosa was when I was about 7 years old. My sister, one of my sisters, was the first one to be officially diagnosed with it. In my case, the condition comes from my mum's side, and I had an uncle. I always remember as a kid who was blind, but actually they didn't know what it was down to back then. So my sister, who was the first one to be officially diagnosed with it, was actually diagnosed at a place called Moorfields Eye Hospital in London, which is now one of the world's leading hospitals on retinal diseases. And she was officially diagnosed way back in the early 80s. And when she went to her appointment and she was diagnosed, they didn't actually know a lot about RP back then. And she was basically told by the eye doctor that she had this thing called retinitis pigmentosa. There was no cure or treatment. And by the way, don't have kids, is what they said to her, which is just crazy when you think of it back then due to the hereditary side of it. But obviously we've come a lot longer, or on a lot further since then. There's a lot more research and information, and we know a lot more about the condition. So back then, when my sister was diagnosed, the first I remember about it was being told that we all had to go to our local eye hospital in Manchester and have tests. I remember, being 7 years old and going to this appointment with my family and having these drops put in my eyes, which I now know to be dilating drops, which I'm sure a lot of you out there will be fairly familiar with, because I have them at every single appointment I go to now. I remember being, 7 years old, having these drops put in my eyes and it making my vision go a little bit blurry for a few hours. But after that appointment, RP, or retinitis pigmentosa, wasn't really spoken about around me. I was pretty much just told we had this eye disease in our family, but if it was going to affect me, it wouldn't affect me until I was much, much older, and to kind of get on with my life and forget about it, which is what I did. So I'm sure there was conversations that went on behind closed doors around the condition as I was getting older, but I wasn't really a part of those conversations. I just kind of forgot about it. When I left school when I was 16, I went to work as a singer. I always wanted to be a singer from the moment I could really remember. And when I was 18, after I finished college, I went and started work as a blue coat for Pontins, and kind of worked at the holiday parks around the UK, and enjoyed my life, working in entertainment, and kind of got on with things. Looking back on it now, I had the first early onset of RP from my early 20s. But because I was always told that it wouldn't affect me till I was much, much older, I didn't actually make that connection with this kind of slight night blindness that I was experiencing, and put it down to the RP. So from the early 20s, I had a kind of very slight night blindness, just having to adjust slightly longer to kind of dim light, which obviously working in entertainment, in kind of stage environments with the stage lights, and being in dark environments with kind of clubs and things like that, I just have to take a little bit of time to adjust. But I didn't really think twice about it. I just kind of got on with it quite naturally. All through my 20s, I worked in entertainment and was enjoying my life. And then things kind of really changed for me about 9 years ago. I was in a new kind of circle of my life, just to kind of put you in the picture of where I was at that time. I'd just moved back to Manchester. I was living in Scotland previous to that for about 10 years. I had just started to settle down. I have had a young daughter from a previous relationship up in Glasgow, and my relationship with her mum split up when she was about 3 years old. I moved back down to Manchester to be near family, and at that point, I was kind of restarting my life. I was driving 3.5 hours to Glasgow and back every other weekend to get my daughter down to Manchester and seeing her. I was still working as a singer. I was also working in car sales at the time. And I went for a routine eye exam. At that time, I just met my new partner, who's now my wife, Amy. We had our son together, who was about 6 months old at the time. And I went for a routine eye exam because I used to get my eyes checked every couple of years just to make sure I was good for driving and things like that. And when I went for this routine eye exam, they looked into the back of my eyes, and I remember this kind of pause from the optician. And he said to me, "Oh, there's been a bit of a change since the last time that we saw you. There seems to be a bit of pigment on your retina. We need to do a few more tests." And they put me to do a test called a visual field test. Now, for the visual field test, for anyone that's not had one of these, what I had to do was I had to sit in front of this big machine, and I had to put each eye onto the machine and hold the button. And every time a light went off in my peripheral visual field, I had to click this button. And as the test started, the longer the test went on, I realized that I wasn't clicking the button. And all of a sudden, this kind of panic, this kind of realization of, oh, this might be happening, kind of came onto me. My wife was waiting in the waiting room with our son, Austin, who was, about 6 months old, in his car seat. We were about to go away for the weekend. And I walked out of that appointment in just this kind of stunned panic of what was happening. The optician said I had to be referred to a retinal specialist. I had to stop driving straight away. And I had to tell my wife, as she was at that point, my fiance, Amy, that I was being referred to a retinal specialist, and they were advising me to stop driving straight away. And, we started to have this conversation about retinitis pigmentosa. And from that moment, our lives changed. 2 weeks later, I went to see a retinal specialist, and I was diagnosed as being severely sight impaired, which is the equivalent in other countries of being legally blind. What started then was a kind of really dark period of 8 or 9 months of really, really struggling. We applied for all the support we could get. I told my employer in car sales what was happening. And unfortunately, immediately, the company that I was working for let me go because I was no longer able to fulfill my role doing test drives. So I lost my job. I was no longer able to drive and pick my daughter up from Glasgow every other weekend. So that put a strain on us. And what happened was, over that 8 or 9 month period, I fell into depression because I was feeling anxious not only about the sight that I was losing, but also the financial pressure it was putting on my family. We applied for support through the government. The main support, which I'm sure most people here in the UK will know, was something called Personal Independence Payment, or PIP. At that time, when I applied, there was an 8 or 9 month waiting list or kind of period before you would actually qualify to receive a first payment. You had to be assessed. And the system that, we had to go through was very, very much flawed. And it really put, a lot of pressure on us. We fell into debt. We lost our house because we were staying in rented accommodation at the time and we could no longer afford the rent. Fell behind with our bills. We had to feed our kids on food packages, on food parcels and food banks for a little while we were struggling financially. And all the while I was, feeling more anxious and depressed because not just because of the sight that I was losing, but because of the financial pressure that it was putting onto my family. I felt guilty. Not only that, but then we had to go through what they call genetic counseling. And myself and my wife found out that the chances of our children, my son Austin, who was just a baby at the time, and my daughter Ellie from my previous relationship in Glasgow, had a 1 in 2 chance that they would lose their sight as well. So there was a lot of kind of things going on at that time. But things change, as they always do. Life always puts these challenges in our way, and just when we think, things are really at their worst, we're offered a glimmer of hope. And the way it changed for me was something that really set me on the path to being here with you guys today and now being known as the Blind Poet. I got invited to a support group. It was actually my sister who was the first one to be diagnosed, who recommended to me when I was really struggling that the best way for me to understand what I was going through and to come to terms with that would be to speak to other people like you guys do in all the groups that you're a part of yourselves. It seemed really obvious when she said it, but before that, I hadn't really thought about reaching out and talking to people. So she said to me, the best way you can really understand is to speak to other people. And she suggested that I join some support groups online on the likes of Facebook and start really talking to people who had gone through the same thing that I was going through, or, was going through it at the same time. And that would help me. So I did. I started to join some Facebook groups online. And from that, I got invited to a support group in Newcastle for people with my condition, RP, and another condition called Usher syndrome, which is the same sight loss as RP, but with hearing loss as well. So it's deafblind. And when the organisers of this support group heard that I was going to be attending, they heard that I was a singer, and they said to me, when you come along, would you mind coming and singing some songs and, being the entertainment for the support group that day? And immediately I said yes. And the reason I said yes to that so, quickly was because actually I was really anxious and nervous about going to the support group. This was going to be the first time that I would be around other visually impaired people with canes, people with guide dogs. This to me was like a glimpse into the future of, what was coming for me. And I felt really anxious about that. So when they asked me to be the entertainment for the support group that day and come sing some songs, immediately I said yes, because being on stage with the previous roles that I've done, being a blue coat and being a singer, was my comfort zone. It was where I felt at ease. So that kind of took away that anxiety of being around these people for the first time and made me feel better about doing it. So the kind of catalyst to kind of this Blind Poet thing and where I am today happened the night before going to this support group. I was in bed. My fiance at the time, as she was, Amy, was next to me trying to get to sleep, and I was going over ideas of songs to sing the following day. And I just had this moment, almost a eureka moment, when I thought it would be a great idea if I could take a song that everyone knows and change the words to speak about my experiences so far with low vision. And I thought that would be a really cool thing to do. So I chose the song Stand By Me by Benny King. I'm sure you all know it, because I love the opening line of when the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see. I'm sure you're all singing along, because that was like night blindness to me. So I rewrote the song in bed within about 20 minutes. The words just kind of came to me, and I called it Stand By Me RP. And the very next day when I went to the support group, I performed the song for the very first time. And immediately when I sang those words, the room changed. People were coming up to me saying that the words that I'd written was able to describe how they felt about their own experiences with low vision and blindness. And it made them feel like they were less alone and they were more understood. And immediately when I got that response, something changed in me, because I always say to people, when I was diagnosed that day in that optician's, I started on this kind of journey, going through these things that a lot of people, not just with low vision and blindness, but any kind of disability or additional need or any kind of life-changing experience go through. I went through a loss of independence, a loss of confidence, I wouldn't go out alone for the first kind of 8 or 9 months without my wife, because when I started to lose my sight rapidly, as I did after that diagnosis, because the kind of stress that I was under added to my sight loss, as it does with RP. I just felt really, really anxious about going out. I remember I used to go out with my wife and my son, and I'd be okay in certain environments, but then when things got too bright or too dark or too busy, I'd cling on to the side of Austin's buggy and feel really scared. So I felt a big loss of independence. I lost my confidence, as I said. The biggest thing it took from me, though, was actually my purpose. I didn't know where my place was in the world anymore when I lost my job, and everything that I'd done before involved me getting around independently and driving. I didn't know what I could do in the world anymore. I would, try and apply for positions, but the minute I spoke about my low vision and blindness and that I was losing my sight, people would make excuses. The phone went down on me, and we were really, really struggling. I now know that there's an almost 75% unemployment rate within the low vision and blind community. And it's not down to the abilities of the people with the conditions. It's actually down to the misconceptions and barriers that many people with disability and low vision and blindness face. And I was starting to experience all these things for the first time. But as I said, the biggest thing it took from me was my purpose. And when I got that response in the room to Stand By Me RP, that song, something in me changed immediately. I just thought, this is something that I could do to make a difference in people's lives, and I could help people. And not only would it help others, but it would help me understand and come to terms more. So immediately I started to write poetry, because to me, music and poetry is the same thing. It's song lyrics, it's rhyming words. And music and poetry has this ability to kind of make people feel the story and the words of these songs and poems in a way that just speaking about it rarely does. We all have songs that we turn to in tough and challenging and dark times of our lives, whether it be a teenage breakup, we turn to particular songs, or when we're really struggling mentally, there might be certain pieces of music that we like to listen to help us through that. And it just seemed really obvious way of being able to help and support people. So instantly I started to write more and more. I made a promise to myself that I was just going to write about everything that myself and my family were going through and post it online on these support groups. So I started to write poems every single day, 2 or 3 a day, and they just started to pour out of me. And the more poems I would write and the more poems I would post online onto these support groups, the more messages I started to get back from people all over the world saying that the words that I was writing were helping them, explain to their friends and their families how they were feeling when they couldn't find the words themselves. So it was really helping people, and that just encouraged me more and more to write more and more pieces and share online. So I continued to do that, and I started to write a lot and build up a little bit of a following on these on these pages, on these support groups. And then someone messaged me and said, oh, you should start your own Facebook page, somewhere where you can post these poems and people can come and read them and listen to them. And I said, I really don't know how to do that. So someone helped me set up a page. We called it Stand By Me RP, named after that song. And I continued to post poems, and it started to build more of a following. And then after a little while, I'd written over 100 pieces of poetry, and someone said to me, oh, you should put these into a book. And I was like, I really haven't got a clue how to even start with that. So they said, oh, we'll help you. So the followers on the page started a GoFundMe campaign. And in February 2016, I released my first book. I've got it here by the side of me. I'm going to hold it up now and describe it for anyone who can't see it. It's called Stand By Me RP. It's obviously named after that song, which was the catalyst to it all. It's got a grey cover, and in big, bold writing on the front in black, it's got stand, and then underneath in purple, the letters Me RP, or By Me RP. And then underneath, it's got a big eye with a purple heart-shaped iris, because purple is the color for retinitis pigmentosa. And the book was released in February 2016, because February is Retinitis Pigmentosa Awareness Month. And I'll never forget the day it came out, because when it was published, I started to get messages that it had gone onto Amazon, it had gone online, and I was a published author for the first time. Myself and my wife went out that day to go and celebrate, and we were on our way to a restaurant. And as we were on our way to a restaurant, my phone rang, and I had a call from Guide Dogs UK. And the Guide Dogs rang me up and said, we found you a potential match in a guide dog. And I'd been on the waiting list then about 18 months for a guide dog. So the day my first book came out was the day I was matched with my guide dog, who's right by me in the room today, laying by my feet, Christopher. And I've had him now 7 years, nearly 8 years. Stand By Me RP then became the #1 European poetry release on Amazon in both America and Australia in its very first week. And that was down to the support of the low vision community and those people who had really shared and followed my poetry on those support pages online. A year later, in February 2017, I released another book, which I'm going to hold up now. It's called Stand By Me RP Volume 2. It's called Stand By Me RP Volume 2, or the reason the first one wasn't called Stand By Me RP Volume 1 is I didn't actually think there was going to be a second book. But Stand By Me RP Volume 1 was released in February 2017, and that became the #1 European poetry release on Amazon in America and Australia on its very first day. Volume 3, which I've got with me now as well, I'm going to hold up. It's the same cover, but in a kind of turquoisey colour with purple writing on the front. That became the #1 European poetry release on Amazon in America and Australia in 2018 in February on its very first day as well. And fast forward to kind of now, where I am now and where I was, after those books got released is a completely different place to where I was when I was first diagnosed and went through those really, really difficult times, 8 or 9 months at the beginning. I now feel that my diagnosis with RP was actually a blessing. I'm actually thankful for my blindness. A lot of people think that's crazy when you say that, but I'm actually grateful for the challenges that I've had, because living with low vision and blindness to me has taught me to really, really appreciate the little things and the important things in life. There's that saying, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. Well, in my case, you don't know what you've got till it's almost gone. And I always say that little tunnel of vision that I have has taught me to really appreciate, what really counts and really cherish the moments in life. My wife says I'm a better husband now because of it. I'm a better friend. I'm a better father because I really take the time to appreciate and make those memories. And I think that's one of the things that, low vision and blindness has really, really taught me. There's a lot of things it's really taught me. One of the toughest things about it, though, is the hereditary side. I'm going to get onto that in a second. But being the way I am now and seeing RP as a blessing has really inspired me to write through my poetry about, the good and the bad and how we all have challenges in life. And if this is ours, then so be it. But, there's a way of being able to take our greatest challenges in life and turn them into our biggest achievements. And that is hopefully what I tried to do with my poetry. I want to share with you another piece of poetry now that really kind of encapsulates that. It's called The Stranger, and it goes like this. Today, a stranger asked me, what has blindness done to me? Has it limited the plans I've made or the things I hoped would be? Has it forced me now to settle on a life that's second best? Has it made me give up lots of things since I failed the blindness test? Do I still have aspirations, special places, dream to go? Is there any point in beauty if the eyes don't work to show? But my answer came so quickly, not a thought considered twice. I am happy for this blindness, for the way it's changed my life. It has taught me what's important and shown me who my real friends are. And I wouldn't change a thing I've learned just to get back in my car. I have met amazing people since this RP took my sight. We share in common struggles, joined together through this plight. Though my retinas are dying, my mind's vision has increased. For each day I'm making memories, for long after sight has ceased. So never offer pity for the broken sense I've lost. For I feel I have gained more than the price that blindness cost. Thank you. So yeah, as I said, I've really kind of got myself into a place now where I'm actually grateful for it. And when I'm having those bad days, one of the things I've really learned through the poetry is, I have what we call bad eye days. I'm sure a lot of you use that expression, especially for those that have, a condition like RP. I can take and channel the negative of the things that I'm feeling because, one of the things I've really come to understand is that we all have challenges in life and we all have good and bad days. And when we have those bad days and we get frustrated of not being able to see things, or we're feeling a bit down about ourselves, one of the things I've come to learn is to remind myself that these things are perfectly normal and perfectly natural to feel, and to not be too hard on myself. And then I can take those things that I'm feeling and put it into a piece of poetry and actually use it to help somebody else. So to turn that negative into a positive. And that's one of the powers of being able to write about these things through the poetry. One of the toughest things about it, though, that, will forever be a struggle to me is the hereditary side of a condition like RP. So as I said at the beginning, when I went through this thing, myself and my wife went through what they call genetic counselling. We discovered that the type of RP that I have means that there's a 1 in 2 chance that my son, Austin, who's now 9, and my daughter, Ellie, who's now 15, nearly 16, will develop RP when they're older. With the type of RP that I have, as I said, it normally doesn't present the first stages of retinitis pigmentosa until their late teens, early 20s, with the gradual, very slow night blindness, and then the peripheral visual field lost. But as I said, we know the carriers. There's a 1 in 2 chance that they'll have it and they'll pass it on. But whether they'll actually present and be affected by that, they won't know. So it's almost like a kind of ticking clock, a kind of waiting game that we've got to kind of wait and see whether they're going to develop it. But even though I feel naturally guilty about that, because it would be naturally guilty, for me to feel that, it also teaches me that I've got to show them as a parent that, despite any challenges they may have in the future, you can still achieve amazing things. And hopefully with the work that I do every single day, it really inspires them and shows them that. But I've written a couple of pieces of poetry that I'm going to share with you now that kind of touch on that. The first one is for my son. It's called Shift This Cloud. I do get emotional when I read these pieces of poems, even though I've read them countless times. But, they're always very raw with me. And I'm sure a lot of you out there, even those that aren't affected by low vision and blindness, that are just parents or have children, can really relate to this. But this is Shift This Cloud. This is for my son, Austin. How do I break the news of what I may have done to you? Won't know for sure, but doctors say the odds are 1 in 2. I look into your eyes and watch for signs I hope aren't there. Pray this RP will end in me. No faulty gene is shared. This tunnel world I live in, hope one day won't be your view. Don't follow in my steps or place foot inside my shoe. The battle for acceptance will be just a story told. With perfect sight, not hurt by light, clear vision, break the mold. I carry heavy guilt through sleepless nights and secret tears. I wait to know the answer, ticking clock of RP's fears. But if in future blindness does come knocking at your door, I'll lead you by example, show you life is so much more. My son, be proud, will shift this cloud and dance in heavy rain. I'll show you all that's possible, strong heart and long white cane. With poems raise awareness, this will be my legacy. 3 books will travel round the world, my Stand By Me RP. So years from now, when you're fully grown, if blindness burden shared, just look at what your dad's achieved, so you'll be more prepared. Thank you. So that poem there is for Austin. Austin is, nearly 10 now, and we've had the conversation about, when's the right time to tell your child that they could potentially go blind. that is something that is personal to every parent. A lot of people have different, kind of thoughts on that. Myself and Amy, we had a discussion with my retinal specialist at Manchester Eye Hospital a couple of years ago, and he said, we can test, and we can do tests on them now, but the thing is with these tests is the only good thing that can come out of them is for you to find out that your son hasn't got it, and why burden a child with that kind of information? So we are under the kind of shared thought now that we won't burden our children with that. When they are old enough to ask questions and learn a bit more, we will answer those. But until comes a day where either Ellie or Austin show any signs, there's no point in really kind of going into that in too much detail. Obviously, they both know a lot about the condition because of the work that I do and the poetry that I write. But unless they ask any questions, I don't think there's any point in really burdening them with that. With Ellie, it's slightly different. Ellie's nearly 16 now. She does know a bit more. I did write a piece of poetry, which I'm going to share with you now, about Ellie. And the situation with Ellie's a little bit different because, she's with her mum up in Glasgow. We don't see each other half as much as I'd like to. The relationship with her mum has always been strained. And when I wrote this poem, which I'm going to share with you next, it's called The Secret. And when I wrote it, I was really thinking about, when is the right time to have that conversation with Ellie? Is there a right time to have that conversation? The internet is what the internet is. And I'm sure, being the age she's at, she can kind of Google and find out things. But unless she kind of comes back and asks these questions, I really didn't want to be the one to have that conversation with her to an early age. So I wrote this poem for her that she could read when she was old enough. It's called The Secret, and I'll let the words in this poem do the explaining. It goes like this. It took me years to come to terms with how my eyes declined, through stages of acceptance, of slowly going blind. But nothing I could ever do would allow me to prepare to tell my little girl the thing I still don't want to share. It's tortured me through sleepless nights, consumed my mind with guilt. This secret I have kept from her could break the trust I built. I pray that she will understand the things I've tried to do and why I never told her that she could be 1 and 2. For she is still a child and far too young to burden with a fate that I might pass to her, for now's her time to live. But soon will come a moment when I know she must be told. When all the battles I have won, I'll pass for her to hold. But for every unheard question, there's an answer I've prepared. They're written in each line, each verse, each poem that I've shared. For every page I've filled, I've emptied out my heart and soul. So one day she would know the way. That's always been my goal. So Ellie, I hope years from now, you'll be there reading this. No, you can do amazing things, whether RP hit or miss. My inheritance to you won't be a passed down faulty gene, but knowing all life's beauty that this VIP has seen. Thank you. Okay, enough of the emotional poems. So, we've touched on the sadness, and also we've touched on the misconceptions a little bit. For those people who aren't aware, I'm sure most of you are watching this, but still to this day, here we are in 2023, and there's still so many misconceptions regarding low vision and blindness and disability in general. And it's crazy. And that's something that, really struck me from the minute I was diagnosed, when I started to kind of lose my sight and use a cane and use a guide dog, about the way that people think that, you're either completely blind or not at all. We've all heard this expression of people saying to us, oh, you don't look blind, which is just crazy, because 75% of disabilities are actually hidden disabilities and there's no outward signs. And with low vision and blindness, only around 7% of people who are, affected by sight loss have no light perception and can't see at all. 93% or thereabouts have some kind of useful vision, but most people out there still think that if you use a cane or you have a guide dog, that you can't see anything at all and get confused when you make eye contact. And actually, a lot of people, find themselves, being accused of faking the blindness, or being questioned about their low vision and blindness by strangers. And that can be quite off-putting. And actually, I think the biggest thing it does is kind of isolate people. The amount of people that I've spoken to who, won't use a cane in public or feel self-conscious about using a cane in public because of the reaction that they get from people out there, or isolate themselves because of it. And I'll always say to people, who say to me things like, oh, I'm not blind enough to use a cane yet, or I'm not blind enough to use a guide dog yet, because they think that, they have to be completely blind to have a cane or use a guide dog. And I'll say to them, okay, do you find yourself not going out to places because it's too dark or too crowded, or you can't see too well, so you kind of put things off, you stay home more than you should? And they go, yeah. And I go, well, in that case, you're ready to apply, or you're ready to use a cane. But because of the misconceptions out there and the way people think that you've got to be completely blind to use a cane or a guide dog, that kind of makes people more hesitant on using a cane in public. So actually, I want to share a piece of poetry with you now that I wrote about that. That'll kind of lift the mood a little bit. So with cane use, as I said, there's a lot of people out there who, go through this process that I only realized when I started using a cane myself, that we all go through this process of feeling a bit self-conscious about our canes, maybe not using them everywhere if we've got a little bit of vision left, leaving them, folded up at home, or having them folded up in our hands, feeling self-conscious. And there's not enough people talking about this kind of process that we go through. So I wanted to share a poem, or write a poem that really touched on that. So it was about a year ago, I think. I got up one morning and I thought, I'm going to write a poem about this. And then I had this idea to write a poem, but write it from the perspective of a mobility cane. So in the poem, it's the cane that's talking. And I hope that this piece of poetry, when you hear it, if you're hearing this for the first time, you'll relate to, and it'll make you realize a few things. And for those people who have no experience of low vision and blindness, who are fully sighted, when they hear this poem, they'll understand as well. And those who are at the beginning of their journeys and are thinking about using a cane, I hope this will make them feel better and encourage them to actually use one. So this is from the perspective of a mobility cane, and it goes like this. You're not the only one who's felt embarrassed to be seen outside walking with me. This for many's always been a part of the whole process, as together we will train. But in time you will realize you'll soon be proud again. I'm made to give you back the things that you may feel you've lost, like pride and independence, all the things that blindness cost. I'm not a sign of weakness. I'm a reason to be proud. Alleviate anxiety whilst you are in a crowd. Sometimes I'm left behind or folded up inside your hand, but I'll be ready for you. I won't judge, I understand. I know these things are natural. It's the way that people stare when you can still see some things, but for blindness you prepare. You don't need to see nothing to be able to use me. That's not the way that blindness works. It fades so differently. I'm here to be a symbol and a signal that you're strong, a reason not to isolate, a reason to belong. So when you're feeling ready, I'll be with you day or night. Unfold me, hold me confident, and swipe me left to right. Eventually you'll come to terms, our partnership remain. It's me and you forever. I am your mobility cane. There we go. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that piece of poetry. Also, I'm a guide dog user. As I said, I've got my guide dog with me, Christopher, here. And it's amazing, as I said, even with my guide dog, some of the questions I get asked when I'm out and about, I'll have people coming up to me, saying to me, oh, are you training him? And I go, no, he's my guide dog. And then they go, oh, you don't look blind. And then we go through that whole conversation again. And I have to kind of explain to them about, that most people who have low vision and blindness have some kind of useful vision. The way I see now is my left eye has completely gone. So I have no useful vision in my left eye. I've just got light perception in that. In my right eye, I've lost all my peripheral vision. And then just up until recently, I had a very kind of clear, almost like looking through a straw, bit of central vision in my right eye. But up until around about 4 months ago now, that clear bit of central vision has now deteriorated, where I can no longer see faces clearly anymore, and everything is blurred. And I'm at the last stage of having any kind of vision remaining. Now, for anyone out there who has got low vision and blindness, I'm sure you'll appreciate this. You know, it can be frustrating, it can be sad at times, it can be isolating, but also vision loss can get us into some funny, tricky situations. And I'm sure we've all got our stories of where that's happened. There's a particular one that I love to share, which I'm going to share with you now. And actually, this story took place before I was actually diagnosed with RP. In my 20s and my early 30s, I was probably in denial about my sight loss. My vision loss and the peripheral visual loss that I had was very, very slight and very, very gradual. And I didn't make that connection between the way I was having to adjust with my sight to RP. And I just kind of got on with things. And this particular story happened when I was working as a singer. As I said, I used to be a cabaret singer. I started off at the Blue Coat as a Blue Coat at Pontins, and I then went on to did some musicals in the West End and sang on cruise ships and hotels abroad, and sang around all the holiday parks as a cabaret singer. And in the early to mid 2000s, I was working as a cabaret singer, and I was down on the south coast of England in Kent and Essex doing some shows down there. I had a couple of days off in between gigs and decided to check myself into a hotel to have a couple of days rest and recuperation. And I went into the gym that afternoon, one afternoon, and I was in the gym working out. Everything was good. And I thought I'd go for a swim. And I went in to use the pool. And then I got out the pool and thought, oh, I'll go for a sauna. So I went to go and use the sauna, and I opened the door to the sauna, and it was quite dark in there, and it was misty and steamy, obviously, with the sauna. And I stood in the doorway waiting for my eyes to adjust to the light because of the night blindness. It took about a minute for my eyes to adjust. So I stood in the doorway waiting. And as my eyes adjusted to the light, to my horror, I realized that there was one woman on her own, sat in the sauna. And basically what I'd just done is opened the door, stood in the doorway, motionless, staring at this woman for a minute. That's about 5 seconds. I was there for a minute, standing motionless, staring straight at her, even though I'd not seen her. And then when I walked in, she got up and left quite quickly, freaked out by the freaky person who just stood in the doorway. So yeah, you know, my vision definitely gets me into trouble. And you know, and I think with the misconceptions out there as well, that can be quite funny at times, because I'm sure, you know, a lot of you experience this. You know, when I'm traveling, as I do quite often now, you know, I'll have assistants booked at train stations and at airports, and someone will be there to help me through a busy platform or a busy terminal and onto my seat on the plane or train. And then I'll sit down and, you know, then get my phone out and, you know, watch a film or something like that. And people will be looking at me strange, saying, you know, how can you do that when you're apparently blind or you're using a cane? But they don't realize that very simple fact that most people who have some kind of low vision and blindness still have some kind of useful sight. It actually happened to a friend of mine. I'll tell you this story quickly, who is a guide dog user. I have my guide dog myself, as I said. And this friend of mine was down in London a couple of years ago now, walking around London with his guide dog, trying to get to a meeting. He was running a little bit late, and he stopped this guy in the street and said to this guy, excuse me, can you tell me where such and such a street is? And this guy, to give him directions, bent down, crouched down on the floor, and started speaking to the guide dog, saying, you turn left there, you go straight down there, you turn right there. And the guy, my friend just was like, what are you doing? I'm up here. And I think the guy just thought that his guide dog was like some kind of doggy sat nav, that he was just going to kind of follow the instructions and take him, which is just incredible. But, you know, those are the misconceptions that we often have to face out there. So, you know, I talked about the poetry, and I talked about, you know, the Stand By Me RP Volume 1, 2, and 3, and how the poems help people online feel less alone, and that they use my words as a way for them to explain to their friends and family how they feel when they can't find the words themselves. And it talks about the misconceptions, not just around low vision and blindness, but anyone who has lived with a disability or has dealt with anxiety or depression, mental health, can relate to the poetry and relate to the words that I speak about. The last couple of years, we had this thing, I'm sure you might remember, called COVID. Yeah, I'm sure if you remember that. I think the whole world, actually, when COVID hit, really stepped into the shoes of people with disabilities, because people, during COVID were having to experience things that people with disabilities have experienced for so long. Social anxiety, dealing with isolation, having to think twice when stepping outside your door. These are things that, we have to live with on a daily basis. So, during COVID, a lot of the poems that I was writing were touching on the isolation of it all and everything else. So, everyone can kind of relate to these words that I write. And now being known as the blind poet, 8, nearly 9 years since my diagnosis, I've actually written 4 books now, which I'm going to speak about the last one in just a moment. I speak at events all over the world now. I travel to America on a fairly regular basis and speak at events out there. I work with all the major organizations here, that feature my poetry, and I write poems for commercials and campaigns and on all sorts of things. And, every day now I feel blessed that I'm able to use this challenge that I have and really help people around the world. The latest book, which I want to touch on now, which came out just about a year ago, just under a year ago now, which I'm going to hold up in front of me, is called Austin's Amazing Adventures. And this is the first in a new children's series of books, which I started to write. The way I came up with the idea for this was, there's a British author by the name of Julia Donaldson. Julia Donaldson writes children's books. They're all short poetic stories. You may have heard, anyone that's parents may know of books called The Gruffalo and Stickman and Room on a Broom and all these kind of books, Zog and these things. And I've always read Austin, my son, these stories. We used to do this thing called Facebook Live Bedtime Stories, where every night at his bedtime, we'd go on a Facebook Live, and all my followers from all over would tune in with their children and would read these stories. And actually, for people out there that have followed me, they've watched Austin grow up from these videos and has read these stories. And a lot of the times we read Julia Donaldson books, because with poetry, with these kind of short poetic stories, when I'm having my bad eye days and I'm unable to read the text, I can memorize the stories through the poems in the same way that I can remember songs. So we always read these kind of stories. And Julia Donaldson did this article in the news a couple of years ago now, saying that there needs to be more children with disabilities featured in children's stories. And immediately when I read this article, I was like, absolutely, yes, there does, because children often face a lot of the things that we face. They face these kind of social barriers within schools, of not being understood or being left out from friend groups because of their different challenges, their additional needs. And we need more characters within children's stories, so these children who are experiencing additional needs and low vision and blindness and disability and all these different challenges can have these characters to relate to. But also these other children reading the stories can read them and realize that these children are actually just like them. So immediately when I read that article, I wrote the first 6 books of this new series in one night. They just fell out of me. 9 years later since my diagnosis, I think Jodie said at the beginning, I think she quoted the number 750, and that blog or that bio that she got to read, that was actually a few years old now. I've written now 2,500 poems in 8 years, and not one poem has taken me longer than 15-20 minutes to write, because if you're not writing from the heart, it's not worth writing. And they literally do fall out of me, almost like there's someone sat on my shoulder. So when I got the idea for Austin's Amazing Adventures, I decided to use Austin as the main character for it to be a bit of a legacy for him. In the book, Austin is a young, visually impaired boy going to school with his best friend, his guide dog, Joe. and it's about the challenges and the things that they face. And also in the future stories, there's going to be characters within those stories that have things that you will see in any school that you walk into this day. So my wife Amy works in the same school that Austin goes to. So we'll have characters with things like autism, ADHD, Asperger's, lots of additional needs, all the things that you'll see in any kind of school. And these characters hopefully will be a thing that other children can kind of relate to. These books, as I said, they've been out since last year, and already they're being used in schools across the UK and in America to teach inclusion and to help children. And they're being used as part of lessons. And I want to read you this book now as a little bit of a peek into Austin's amazing adventures, so you can hear the story and how it helps children, which I'm very, very proud of. It goes like this. In a little town not far from here, there's a boy that you might know. His name is Austin Steele, and his guide dog friend named Joe. Each day they take adventures as they travel around the world, and here within these pages is how their story first unfurled. When Austin was just 5, his sight began to disappear. But like his dad, he wasn't sad and felt no need to fear. For Austin's dad had shown him that the vision in his mind can overcome the obstacles of slowly going blind. His tunnel view was shrinking, independence getting tough. Some days the outside world felt far too hard, he'd had enough. But with a paw, what once unsure became a strength to grow. Returning pride, for by his side, a friend in Guide Dog Joe. Now Austin feels amazing, and he knows that he can be absolutely anything, despite what he can't see. Now with the little he has left, each day is filled with pride. The busy places once had feared, with Joe no longer shied. Though people stare, they couldn't care, just smile and say hello to Austin Steele and his best friend, his guide dog, who's named Joe. In a little town called Prestwich, the sun began to rise. As Austin yawned, a new day dawned, though viewed through tunneled eyes. Today, like many others, was a day he'd go to school, and with his Joe to guide him, our Austin felt quite cool. But also he felt nervous because today was the big test. The teacher gave out spellings and Austin would try to do his best. Though he could see the whiteboard, some words were hard to read. The other kids in Austin's class wrote them down with ease and speed. But Miss Tierney was so clever, and she knew our Austin well. She noticed he was struggling. It was a sign that she could tell. She said, "No need to worry. These tests you shall not fail. For we will learn together a special language they call Braille. On paper dots all bumpy, these words in print embossed. And newfound skills succeed you will. Your smile will not be lost." So each day, Miss Tierney and Austin would each day take the time, and feeling with his fingers learnt his spellings line by line. Once more he felt amazing, and as he journeyed home to play, he spared a thought for the lesson taught, with help always away. There you go. And that's Austin's amazing adventures, which I'm so, so proud of. So as I said, I'm so proud of being here with you today. And, I always say to people that I don't just write the words, that I mean them. I'm sure lots of you, when we get to the Q&A in just a moment, will have lots of questions, and I'd love you to share some of your own experiences. One of the things that I'm doing at the moment, and I hope to be doing with you guys, hopefully at a later date, potentially in May, is poetry workshops. I spoke at the beginning about how poetry has this unique ability of being able to kind of reach out and touch the soul and touch the hearts of people in a way that few things do. And actually, it's a great vehicle for us to be able to share and talk and channel the things that we're going through in our day, and use it to really understand and overcome these obstacles ourselves. So over the last so many months now, I've been doing them here in the UK, both virtually and in person, and in America, going out to America and doing poetry workshops. And we've had people who have never written poetry, who don't like poetry, who have listened to my talks, and at the end been able to write pieces of poetry that has allowed them to talk about things that they wouldn't normally be able to voice. And that's something that, we're going to do, hopefully with you guys at a later date. Also, another thing that I'm planning on doing, another project I'm working on at the moment, is we're going to do a Stand By Me or a Blind Poet record for charity, where we're going to have lots of musicians and singers who are visually impaired and blind from all around the world record pieces of music using the poems that I've written and turning it into different types of music. So we're going to have some rap music, some, pop, rock, opera, with country, we've got all sorts. So there's going to be opportunities for people out there like yourselves to even be a part of that as well. Before we start the Q&A, though, I want to share one more piece of poetry with you. This poem, when I wrote this, I actually wrote this during lockdown, during COVID. I was doing at the time this weekly kind of Zoom support group called Tea and Poetry, which people from all around the world would tune into. And each week we'd have conversations and talk about all the things that were going on in our lives and talk about low vision and blindness. And every week I would share some new poems. And this poem, when I wrote it for Tea and Poetry, someone said to me on the live, that poem really describes every element or most elements of what we experience with low vision and blindness. I entitled it Blind Perceptions, and I hope you guys can relate to it. After this, we're going to be turning our cameras on, and you can turn your microphones on, and we'll go into the Q&A. I hope you've enjoyed today. For myself, Dave Steele, I'm going to leave you with this before we go into Q&A. This one's called Blind Perceptions. When I find it, just 1 second. I need the opening line. Here we go. This is Blind Perceptions. I know there's strength inside of you, though all you feel is lost. Don't be afraid as eyesight fades. Sorry, let me just start again. Even my eyes went there. Just 1 second. Let's try that again. I know there's strength inside of you, though all you feel is numb. Don't be afraid as eyesight fades for what is still to come. You will adjust. In these words, trust. We share these tunneled eyes. A mix of strength and anxiousness, the same in me applies. My shins are full of bruises and my confidence misplaced. At times, self-isolated, felt the world too much to face. So I'm here to remind you, all the times we fail don't matter. There's lots of misconceptions still. Let's remind them of the latter. It's not that complicated. Change how blindness is defined. Let's educate, articulate the many ways we're blind. It's never all or nothing, many shades and different views. Yet there's this stereotype they keep on printing in the news. No wonder some of us have fears when out in crowded place. They see the cane but can't explain why we look them in the face. There's some of us who stay at home, convinced of the excuse that because we don't look blind enough, there's a need to be recluse. Don't waste your life on people whose opinions are way off. Just swipe your cane with courage. Hold your head with pride aloft. So never doubt what we're about, despite what some believe. Come join me on my mission and change the way we are perceived. I won't let the haze that fills my eyes consume the rest of me. There's more to life than edge of knife, despite what I can't see. Try not to care as people stare with looks of vague suspicion. But why should I explain to them the terms of my condition? Though it's much simpler to stay home, won't waste another day. Their pity's just an obstacle that's getting in my way. And though I am blind, won't be confined by others' misconceptions, this poetry that spills from me will change their blind perceptions. Though anxious chest and days depressed have far from disappeared, I've learned to breathe while I still grieve, control these things I fear. My kids look on, not on what's gone, but all each day I teach. For if tomorrow their eyes pay, life's dreams are still in reach. So I'll not cry as vision dies, won't focus on the blur. No point in holding on to how those days and eyes once were. Thank you very much, guys. And you can all turn your cameras back on now and turn your microphones on. I think we're going to go into the Q&A. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much for that, Dave. Thanks for sharing so honestly your personal journey and your the way that you've turned your passions really into this whole new direction for your life and following your eureka moments.